I sent you 4 sheets for the Saturn to the Sun, or Saturn to any planet. Originally, I just had the one, but then I sent you 4 because you'll see this graph I'm showing here shows you if Saturn's going to conjunct Saturn 2. You put the Saturn position, you put the Sun position, but if it's going to conjunct that planet or the Sun first, if that's the first, if it's going to make a conjunction is the first aspect it makes, then this is the graph you would use. If it's past the conjunction, it's going to hit a square first. It hits the square first. So this is the graph you use. It the square goes to the opposite and comes to the square, then the conjunction. It goes around from that. So this will still allow you to have 30 years on a page, but starting from where it works for you. So suppose you have the opposite. It comes up to oppose your Sun first. You'll use this chart, this graph. So there's 4 graphs, and you just use the one that's useful. So it's all set up so you don't have to redraw the graph all the time. For me, for the first maybe 2,000 to 5,000 charts I had to hand draw every graph, and I just redrew them. It was before computers. So I just had to draw these. It's a line, a couple of drawings across, and I just write things on the side. I wouldn't have had the lines there. I just would have written dates beside it, and that would work. Or do it down line paper. So if it's going to hit the waning square for first, it's that. So you got the 3 charts depending on what your first transiting aspect is to the Sun. Okay. So we're going to work with that. And this whole process, the very fact that Saturn is the Saturn can conjunct your Sun anytime between the time you're first born, between age 0 and 29 or 30. So if Saturn conjuncts your Sun at you're 3 years old, it's very different than because Saturn's conjuncting your Sun when you're 15 or when you're 21 or 27. Wow, these are really different times, different ages, different developments of Saturn when you're having to define what your goals are. So Saturn's your goals, your self-importance. Saturn, the Sun, and when Saturn conjunction, you got to, I call it, you define your goals. But your graph is going to start. So if it happens before you're 30, or really before you're 15 for sure, you don't define your goals. The goals are being defined for you by your parents and by their circumstances and their limits and structures or their disciplines. They're being defined for you. You don't get the chance to define your own goals and what you want to do yourself till Saturn starts on your Sun. Work on something that would build up to be confidently yours. Doesn't mean you can't be confident. It's just you can be confident that it's not really yours. So you're not really consciously directing the purpose of your life. It's a huge thing. What time does that first Saturn conjunct the Sun happen? Now, sorry, just got the clock disappeared. Okay, we're doing fine. Okay, so the cycle begins at the conjunction. It really starts, it's the relationship of Saturn to your Sun starts at the moment you're born and goes along and starts moving around, and it goes through its stages. But it doesn't start consciously until Saturn conjuncts your Sun. So that Saturn conjunct your Sun is the beginning of your defining your goals. Now, if it happens in the first 15 years, it's happened for you. Your life's being decided for you, and you're having to go on that and react to that and build up, go through all your Saturn returns, other things. It's not going to be, if it happens to you when you're 12, you're not, or 7, but let's say 12, it's not going to be till you're 42 when it happens again, when you start to decide what you're going to do with your life on your terms. You're going to be working in context with everyone else, with what's been set for you or what hasn't been set for you, positive or negative. But so this moment of when you come into your Saturn return and how to work it or how to deal with it is so important. So if it's when you're a kid and you're dealing with one that you're doing kids chart and your parents are there, they need to take on commitments or have things defined for them. They need to be working on something. Often when you're young, you're having to overcome an inadequacy, could be a bone problem or teeth problem or something you might have to do it. But there's you're trying to get them to be more responsible or take on commitments to work towards something. And if they can't set goals for themselves, you'll set it for them. I'll be just like my dad. I'll do what my dad's going to do. you know, or you set things up so they're working on something. But when it comes in your teenage years, you're going to be thinking, I'm making these decisions, I'm going to make these goals, I'm going to go for this, and you kind of are, but your maturity level is still, the first 14 years, you're just becoming the combination of your parents. From 14 to 30, you're half becoming yourself and half getting your own experiences and responsibilities and half still tied up to your parents and where you came from. And so you're making that first, from 14 to 30, you're making perhaps a more conscious decision, but often you're still in the system. I have to do this. It's being structured by what's happening around you or not happening around you. Still, many people do define their goals and set things up in that time period. It's just still somewhat in context or in reaction to what's happened to them. Sometimes you can be running into the law, sometimes it's getting pregnant, sometimes it's all kinds of things that come in that challenge these things and bring in a whole new wave of commitments. Whether you finish school or not, how far did you go or not, what are you going to do next or not? They're all kind of trade-offs with Saturn going through that teenage and the early 20s. But by the time we're 30, most people that are going to marry, have kids, a few kids, a kid or two is there, and wow, all the commitments are already set up for the next 30 years. And that can all get set up before you're defining your own goals. And everybody expecting how your kids should be and how things should be done. And so if you're 12 and it happens not till 42 that you begin to define the goals for yourself. If you're 19 when it happens, it's limited what goals you'll set, but you'll have a first run at it. And then at 49, you would get your second choice to define your goals in your life. And then at 79, you only get 2 or 3 of these in a life. And really, usually the one between maybe 21 or 21 and 45 is the main one, is the most conscious one. Although very real decisions get made later in later years than that. How much can I deal with? What can I do? How long do I work? What do I achieve? What do I take the next commitment? Don't I? Where do I level off? How much can I handle? How many kids do I have? How can I deal with 1? How can I deal with 10? Like, it's a vast number of Martian experiences happen. We accumulate our experiences, we're trying to understand them, expand them. Jupiter and Saturn saying, whoa, how much can I deal with? I can't deal with all that. So it's a natural thing for Saturn to be sensitive to limits and limitations, to be set up with restrictions where you run into it or you're seeing it or you get serious or inhibited or restricted about what you're doing. The solution is not to escape it. The solution is to say, okay, what can I do? What do I have to get back on? What are my main priorities? What do I have to work towards? Do I have to make a decision for myself? Do I make the commitment and test it and try it? It's better to have tried than failed, and fail than never to have tried. Okay, so we run across these things daily and they accumulate. But when Saturn's hitting the sun, any aspect of the sun is going to be, here we go. Okay, we're going to have a, this is basic, let's say, I call it, and I just use these keywords consciously and simply when I'm working with transits. When Saturn conjunctions with Sun, you're defining your goals. Your Sun is going along, you're trying to be confident, Saturn's coming along, make some decisions, define what you want. That's, you're either too spread out, not enough achieving, and you're just going to level off here and be defensive, or you're going to try and accomplish something. Sometimes leveling off is very appropriate, but will you be content in 7 years if you level off now and don't make the effort then? A lack of ambition can be a very frustrating thing. Too much ambition can be a very frustrating thing, especially for someone relating to you. But what is just enough? We bump up and down around the scale. So when Saturn conjuncts your Sun, you define your goals. I mean, instantly, by the time we look at Saturn, you've gone through Saturn to itself. When does Saturn conjunct the Sun? When did I define my goals in my life? What years did that happen in? It's the first thing you want to see. You're seeing the beginning of the 3 main cycles of your sense of purpose in your life. So I'll just stick mine up here. And not that you get bored of it or that mine's the greatest one to take as an example. But my first Saturn return, my Saturn conjuncted my Sun when I was 6 and 7 years old. My dad had gone bankrupt. My parents had split up. They just decided to get back together. We moved to a town. We moved to St. Lambert, and we lived in a very poor place. It was on the edge of a river. I loved the place, but I never, for me, out of all of that, other than having to be in new school and go other things, I didn't realize that we were relatively poor till I went to school. And I started seeing other people had other things. It didn't really matter to me, but still, that was on my Saturn return. My dad coming back in, dealing with teachers. And this was also the time when I got the Russian gym teacher who really recognized my capacity for agility and my lack of fear, and he put me on the grade 11 gym team. So in some ways, making some commitment, accomplishing something, I mean, I didn't feel it was a commitment being on the gym thing. I was just high on doing things. It was better than sitting home and not doing nothing. So I went, but they were formative things. But my goals were defined for me then by what culture I was coming up and dealing with alcohol, violence at home, going out, trying to deal with teachers, and running into other authority figures that were also post-war very restrictive, very strict. So that was the first Saturn return. For me, it came at 6, 7. Everybody's got a different time that this happens at. And there's a whole bunch of time before that first conjunction that you're really living on borrowed time. You're in other people's worlds and you're going along thinking that's as important and that's what's real until Saturn comes to your Sun when there's pressure to what are you going to do for yourself? You know, even though I had restrictions at home, I didn't think I never cared about it. I just made sure I did enough things myself. I was a bit of a mischievous kid in a way, but by the time we were told we were allowed to go to the park by ourselves, me and my younger brother, we'd already been a couple of miles away over to an island, and we'd wandered and took on other adventures way before that. But we grew up in the, I mean, it could be 20 below or pouring rain. And they say, we don't want to see your face, go and play for a couple hours. It's pouring, I don't care, get out of the house. That was normal. But because of that, even though it was seemingly restrictive, I had a lot of great adventures in nature and rain and trees and nature. Yeah, who knows, it just happened that way. That was a very formative time for me. I hardly have any memories before this time of the parents splitting up and other things that were going on at this time. Okay, go through that, going through school, go through high school, other things. By the time Saturn came back to itself, I was married. I had built up an astrology library. At the school, I'm teaching astrology. I'm being the astrologer, doing radio and TV shows, so really, really busy. But I had given the library away to this university, a spiritual university. I was trying to build up a spiritual university. And this astrology, mystical and astrology library, and they tore it apart. Like, I went to check it after 5 years. I had this clause that after 5 years, I could take it back if I had to. I went back and saw it. They cut all the shelves in half to fit it into someone's basement. That people read borrowed books, they never took them back. The library was decimated. And I was so furious. I made the decision to take the library back. I just saw it in the second. I said, I'm taking this back. I'll be here on the weekend. I'm not leaving here another day. I could hardly afford it. It had a lot more work. I had to rent a truck. I had to set up the library in the place I was living at, which fortunately was a studio and had space to do it. However, taking back the library was the beginning of the end of my second marriage because my wife wasn't prepared. It was there, but it interfered, and the extra commitments ended up squeezing out the relationship. But